My fiancée walked out at dinner to find herself. So I canceled our $18,000 wedding, cut her off, and let her discover her lover's sick secret. My fiancé stood up in the middle of a romantic dinner, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "I don't think this is going to work anymore," before walking out like our 2 years together meant absolutely nothing. I didn't chase her. Instead, I went home, quietly canceled our $18,000 wedding venue, revoked her access to everything, and let her walk right into a devastating trap involving the very man she was secretly leaving me for. I am 34 years old, and as I sit here typing this, I haven't slept for more than 3 consecutive hours in the past 72. I am sitting at the kitchen counter of a downtown Chicago apartment that still has 2 crystal wine glasses hanging on the rack above the stainless steel sink. I haven't been able to make myself take the second one down. It isn't out of sentimentality or some desperate clinging to a ghost. It is more like I am preserving a crime scene. I am keeping the scene completely intact until I have fully processed what happened in it, analyzing every angle of the deception. The knock on my door came this morning. I knew it was coming. I didn't know the specific morning or the specific hour, but I had known for 2 entire days that it was inevitable. It is the exact same way you know a severe storm is rolling in. The atmospheric pressure drops, the birds go entirely quiet, the wind dies down, and everything gets that particular, terrifyingly charged stillness. I opened the door, and I looked at their faces, and their faces told me everything I had calculated had landed exactly where I had aimed it. But to make this make sense, let me start from the dinner. The dinner is where the visible, public part of this story begins, even though the real, insidious story started much earlier, in quieter rooms and behind locked screens. We had been engaged for exactly 14 months. Her name is Sarah, and she is 31. The wedding was meticulously scheduled for late spring. The venue was booked, massive, non-refundable deposits were paid, and the invitations were in the final design phase. With a boutique printer, we had already put a heavy partial payment down on. Sarah had been the one to drive almost all of the planning. At the time, I had been incredibly grateful for her dedication. I was busy managing a massive software migration for my tech firm, and she seemed to thrive on the details. I now understand, with sickening clarity, that she drove the planning because she was the one with the most invested in its public dimensions. The wedding, for her, was a theatrical event, an aesthetic, a show to put on for her friends and colleagues. I had made the fatal mistake of thinking it was a marriage. The restaurant for that fateful dinner was entirely her choice. It was an upscale, ridiculously expensive Italian place near the theater district. It is the kind of room with heavy white tablecloths, crystal water goblets, and lighting carefully calibrated to make everything look slightly more romantic and cinematic than it actually is. There were low-hanging pendant lights over each table, throwing warm, intimate circles of yellow light onto the cloth, leaving the edges of the room and the other patrons in a flattering, anonymous shadow. We had been there before, twice. Both were genuinely good evenings. I remember thinking, when she suggested it earlier that week, that it was a very good sign. A nice, expensive dinner midweek, entirely on her initiative. I was actively looking for good signs because the previous 2 months had desperately needed them. The previous 2 months had been characterized by a creeping, inexplicable distance. She had been physically present but mentally miles away. But I will get to that. We sat down. We ordered a $200 bottle of Barolo. We talked about perfectly ordinary things. We discussed her work in corporate PR, my project timeline, a trip her older sister was planning to Aspen. She was pleasant. She was attentive. She was present in a way she simply hadn't been recently. And I felt my shoulders dropping. I felt myself relaxing into the conversation, the way you relax into a warm bath you've been desperately missing. I asked her about the final invitation design. Noting that we were coming up on the printer's deadline, she smiled, took a sip of her wine, and said she had been thinking about the timeline with the printer and we should probably talk about that. I smiled back and said, "Sure, whenever you're ready." She nodded. We ate our appetizers. The food was spectacular, and for about 40 uninterrupted minutes, I genuinely thought whatever unspoken tension had been off between us was finally correcting itself. Then, she set down her silver fork. She placed her hands flat on the white tablecloth on either side of her half-eaten plate. It was a gesture so deliberate, so physically controlled, that it was immediately clear to me it had been practiced in a mirror. She looked at me, her eyes completely devoid of the warmth they held just seconds prior. "I don't think this is going to work anymore," she said. The restaurant simply continued around us. Someone at a table nearby threw their head back and laughed at a joke. A waiter in a crisp white shirt passed by our table with a bottle of champagne and a white towel draped over his forearm. The pendant light over our table continued to throw its warm yellow circle. The heavy white tablecloth held the light. Everything in the physical world was exactly as it had been 3 seconds before, and yet my entire reality was now completely unrecognizable. "Okay," I said. My voice came out perfectly steady. I remember being distantly surprised by my own vocal control. "I've been trying to find the right time to say this," she continued, her voice rehearsed. "And there isn't a right time. I just think we've been heading in different directions, and I don't think getting married is going to fix that." "When did you start thinking this?" I asked, keeping my hands on my lap. She looked down at the tablecloth, unable to hold my gaze. "A while." "How long is a while?" "I don't know. A few months." "A few months." I repeated the words slowly, letting them hang in the air. The custom invitations, the $18,000 venue deposit, the catering tastings, the endless planning she had continued to drive and manage while secretly thinking, for a few months, that it wasn't going to work. I filed that specific detail away in my mind carefully. "Is there something specific?" I asked calmly. "Or is this just a general feeling?" "It's not one thing," she said, reciting what sounded like a PR statement. "It's just, I've been feeling like we want different things. Like I want a life that looks different than what we are building together." "What does the life you want look like?" I asked. She hesitated. It was a microsecond of a pause, but something in that hesitation was pure, unfiltered information. It was the hesitation of someone guarding a secret. "I just need some space to figure that out," she said finally. I looked at her across the white tablecloth in the warm pendant light. "I am 34 years old. I had given her 2 years of my life. 14 months of a dedicated engagement. We had a spring wedding scheduled with tens of thousands of dollars in deposits already paid, and she was sitting here telling me she needed space to figure out what she wanted, using language so carefully generic and sanitized that it contained absolutely no actual information, which, to a logical mind, is itself a massive piece of information. "Okay," I said again. She waited. She sat there in the silence, waiting, I think, for something else. She was waiting for the pursuit. She was waiting for the desperate argument, the emotional breakdown, the tears, or the frantic negotiation. She was waiting for some dramatic response that she had already scripted a clever counter-argument for. "That's it?" she asked, her brow furrowing slightly. "I don't know what else to say. You've told me you've been feeling this for a few months and you need space," I replied, my tone completely flat. "What exactly would you like me to add?" I thought you'd have more to say." "I have quite a lot to say, Sarah. But I think the more informative conversation would be the one you are actively choosing not to have with me right now. So, I am not going to perform the reaction you're sitting there waiting for." Her jaw tightened slightly. The mask slipped just a fraction. She picked up her expensive leather designer bag from the empty chair beside her and stood up. "I'm going to go," she said. "Okay." She looked at me for one long, unresolved moment. Then she turned on her heel and walked out of the restaurant. I watched her thread her way between the white-clothed tables, past the other wealthy couples and the bustling waitstaff, through the heavy glass front door, and out into the chilly Chicago street, without looking back a single time. I sat alone at the table. I picked up my wine glass and finished my Barolo. I calmly signaled the waiter. When he approached, noticing the empty chair, I simply asked for the dessert menu. I ordered a $14 espresso tiramisu that I had absolutely no desire to eat. When it arrived, I ate it methodically, bite by bite. I did this because I was absolutely not going to leave a half-finished dinner and run out of a restaurant in a way that communicated distress, panic, or weakness to every single person in that room. I paid the full $260 check. I left a generous 30% tip. I put on my tailored wool jacket, walked out with my posture straight and my pace entirely normal. When I got to my car in the parking garage, I unlocked it, got in, and sat in the driver's seat for a full minute before starting the engine. My hands were gripping the leather steering wheel, completely still. It struck me as physiologically strange given what my chest was doing. There was a kind of deep, slow, agonizing clenching in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart rate and absolutely everything to do with what I already, in some primal, prior knowledge part of my brain, suspected. A few months, feeling like she wanted a different life. language chosen for maximum vagueness, the restaurant chosen specifically for the public nature of it, a location where my response would be automatically moderated and suppressed by the presence of other people. The practiced, rehearsed quality of those flat hands on the tablecloth. This had been planned. It was not a spontaneous emotional breakdown. It was prepared. And the preparation was in service of something, or someone, she didn't want to name. I drove home in total silence. I unlocked my apartment. I went into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and made a cup of black tea that I didn't drink. I sat at the granite kitchen counter, the exact spot where I am sitting right now, and I opened my laptop. The very first thing I did was the one thing she arrogantly thought was already secured. The wedding venue. The venue was a highly exclusive, historic botanical garden in the city. It was breathtaking, and it was wildly expensive. It had been booked entirely in my name. She had suggested it, but I had made the calls, handled the negotiations, and signed the contract. It was a massive financial commitment, an $18,000 deposit that I had fronted entirely from my own savings, with the verbal understanding that we would reconcile the finances closer to the date. I opened my files and pulled up the PDF of the contract. I read it at signing, because I am a project manager, and I read every single contract I sign. The contract had a very specific cancellation clause. The window for a cancellation that recovered 75% of the deposit was, by the strict legal terms, within 60 days of a formal written notice prior to the event. I looked at the calendar on my screen. We were exactly 43 days from that window closing. If I waited, if I played her game of giving her space, that window would slam shut, and I would be out 18 grand. I wrote the formal cancellation notice at 11:47 p.m. that night. I sat alone in my quiet kitchen, the second wine glass hanging mockingly above me on the rack. I kept the email professional, citing the exact clause in the contract. I sent it to the venue director by email, and because I left nothing to chance, I followed it immediately with a certified mail request through an online legal service. Formal. Documented. Time-stamped. By the time the sun came up, the cancellation would be in process. Next was the boutique printer. A smaller deposit of $4,200, but again, in my name and paid from my accounts. Cancelled. Email sent. Then, I turned my attention to the joint wedding planning folder we had built in the cloud. It was a massive shared digital workspace containing every spreadsheet, every vendor contact, the timeline, the seating chart in progress, the floral arrangements, and the notes on the catering tasting. I didn't delete it. Deleting it would alert her. Instead, I meticulously exported every single document in that folder to my private, personal encrypted drive. Once I had a localized backup of everything, I went into the sharing settings of the cloud folder and I removed her access. Quietly. Without a single notification. Because of how the cloud sync worked, the documents sat there in her local folder and appeared, from her side, exactly as they had been. What changed was that her access to the shared, live version, the one with my financial annotations, the active vendor correspondence, and the master timeline was permanently severed. She would still see a folder on her desktop. It just wouldn't update anymore. She was locked out of the infrastructure of the wedding. I finished all of this administrative execution by 2:00 inches the morning. Then, I did the one thing that confirmed everything I didn't want to believe. I pulled out my phone. We had each other's location shared on a GPS tracking app. It was the kind of modern arrangement that is initially presented as a mutual safety precaution, but inevitably drifts over time into something one-sided. I checked it occasionally when she was driving home late in the snow, or when I was trying to perfectly calibrate the timing of dinner coming out of the oven. She checked it based on what I could observe. Rarely. It was still on. In her arrogant assumption that she had controlled the narrative at dinner, she hadn't even thought to turn it off. I opened the app. The map is loaded. I looked at where she had been since leaving the restaurant 3 hours ago. She had not gone to her older sister's house in the suburbs. She had not gone to her best friend Jessica's apartment on the east side, the place she usually fled to when she needed to vent or decompress. She had not gone anywhere. A woman who simply needed space to figure herself out would logically go. She was at a hotel. It was a mid-range corporate boutique hotel near the downtown business district. It is the kind of hotel that is not a luxury statement, but is an arrangement. It is functional. It is private. It has a discreet underground parking garage. It is absolutely not the kind of place you go alone to think about your life. I stared at the little blue pin pulsing on the digital map for a long, agonizing moment. I felt the cold reality wash over me, freezing the blood in my veins. Then, I closed the app. 10 seconds later, I reopened it. I zoomed in on the street address and took a screenshot. The image saved to my camera roll, perfectly time-stamped at 2:14 a.m. Then I closed the app again, locked my phone, and set it face down on the cold granite counter. I sat there in the silence and I thought about the previous 2 months. The 2 months I had been circling in my mind without naming. I thought about a specific Tuesday evening 6 weeks prior when she had come home from a late work event with a peculiar, bright, slightly over-explained energy. It was a manic energy that I had noticed, found odd, and willfully set aside because I trusted her. I thought about a name I had heard twice in her casual work conversations. Marcus. Marcus was a senior account manager who had recently transferred to her division. She mentioned him with just enough frequency to establish normalcy, but never enough to make him a focal point. It was exactly like a director rehearsing a minor background character into a scene, so the audience doesn't realize he's the actual villain until the final act. I thought about a Saturday 3 weeks ago. She had told me she was going to look at luxury linen fabric samples for the reception tables. The fabric boutique was 20 minutes north of our apartment, but she was gone for 4.5 hours. When she returned, her excuse for the delay involved traffic and stopping for coffee. But the geography and the timeline had always been slightly off. The geometry of our life had been subtly warped for months. I just hadn't assembled the distorted pieces into a coherent shape until this exact moment. I did not go to the hotel. I want to be absolutely, unequivocally clear about that. I did not drive down there. I did not bang on room doors. I did not make a scene. I went to my bedroom at 2:30 a.m. I lay down in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and I simply breathed, in and out. Methodical. Surviving the night. Update 1. In the morning, I got up. I ground fresh beans and made a pot of black coffee. At 7 a.m., I picked up my phone and called my older brother Tom. Tom is a corporate litigator. More importantly, he is the only person on this earth I call when I need to think out loud with someone who will not react emotionally before thinking logically. He answered on the second ring. "You're up early. What's wrong? Walk me through what you know about canceling joint financial commitments," I said. "Stop," Tom said instantly, his lawyer brain activated. "Walk me through what you know first." Facts only. I walked him through it. I gave him the timeline, the dinner, the exact dialogue, the hotel location, the cancellation emails I had already sent. I gave him the data. Jesus, David. He exhaled heavily. "Okay. What do you want to do?" "I want to know the full picture before I do anything else. I want my money secured, and I want to watch her hang herself with her own rope." "That's smart," Tom said. "Don't move fast. Move right. You've locked down the major bleeding with the venue and the printer. Do not contact her. Let the silence do the heavy lifting." I spent day 2 gathering intelligence. I didn't do this in a dramatic, cinematic surveillance way. I did it in the quiet, terrifying way that becomes available to you when you are completely calm, paying absolute attention, and the person who is managing what you see has stopped managing it because they think they've already won. Sarah thought the relationship was effectively suspended, so her operational security dropped to 0. Marcus's name appeared in a context that made the geometry suddenly, devastatingly precise. A mutual acquaintance, a woman named Jessica, who ran in our overlapping professional PR circles and had been on our wedding guest list, sent me a direct message on Instagram that afternoon. The message was awkward, clearly uncomfortable, the digital equivalent of someone nervously shifting their weight from foot to foot. Jessica wrote, "David, I'm so sorry to send this. I feel sick even typing it. But I saw Sarah last night. She was with Marcus from her agency. They were at the Oak Room. They were very clearly together, holding hands across the table, kissing. I didn't know if you guys had broken up, but I felt like you needed to know. I'm so sorry." The Oak Room. An upscale steakhouse. I pulled up Google Maps. I typed in the Oak Room. Then I typed in the address of the mid-range corporate hotel from my 2:14 a.m. screenshot. They were exactly 2 blocks apart. I sat with that geography for a long while. The dinner with me to demand space. The immediate walk out. The rendezvous at the steakhouse, 2 blocks from the hotel. The hotel room. It was a perfectly executed itinerary of betrayal. I responded to Jessica's message with genuine, composed warmth. I thanked her. told her I was already handling the situation, and assured her she had absolutely done the right thing. I meant every word. Here is what I did not do on day 2. I did not call my fiancée. I did not text her. I did not reach out to her on social media. I became a ghost. My phone had received 2 text messages from her. One had come in the previous night at 1:15 a.m. It read, "I hope you're okay." It was written in the specific, patronizing language of someone who wants acknowledgement that the damage they inflicted is manageable, so they can sleep with a clear conscience. The second text came that morning at 9:30 a.m. It read, "Can we talk soon?" This was written in the panicked language of someone who has suddenly realized the silence is not performing the function they anticipated. My lack of pursuit was terrifying her. I read both messages. I swiped them away. I did not respond to either. What I did instead was make an appointment. There was a 2 p.m. opening with Mr. Vance, the ruthless contract attorney I had consulted once years ago on a complex business acquisition matter. I walked into his mahogany-paneled office carrying a meticulously organized manila folder. It contained the cancellation confirmation from the venue, the documentation of the deposits I had fronted from my solo accounts, a clear timeline of the engagement period, and the receipts for the rings. I was in his office for 90 minutes. We went through the legal definition of conditional gifts, the engagement ring, the liability of joint contracts, and the strategy for minimizing my exposure. I left his office with a very clear, airtight understanding of my legal and financial position. I was bulletproof. Then came day 3. The knock. I had been up since 6 a.m. I was showered, dressed in dark jeans and a sweater, coffee made, sitting at the kitchen counter when I heard the distinct sounds on the hallway stairs. It wasn't one person. It was 2 sets of footsteps. That auditory detail told me something crucial before knuckles even touched wood. She hadn't come alone. She had brought a human shield. I walked to the door and opened it. Sarah was standing there, and her mother, Helen, was standing right beside her. Helen had been, throughout the entire 14 months of our engagement, unfailingly warm to me. She was a sweet, traditional woman who had hugged me fiercely at family gatherings, baked me pies, and referred to me loudly as practically her son. But now, Helen was standing in my doorway with an expression that I can only describe as the look of a manager who has arrived expecting to de-escalate a customer service situation, only to realize the building is actively on fire. Sarah's face was entirely different from anything I had seen in our 2 years together. It wasn't the careful, pleasant mask of the dinner. It wasn't the managed neutrality of recent weeks. It was something entirely stripped away. Her eyes were red and slightly swollen in a way that wasn't recent. She had been crying heavily, and it hadn't been that morning. It looked like she had been crying for 24 hours straight. "We need to talk," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "Okay," I said, stepping back. "Come in." They walked into the apartment. I did not offer them tea or coffee. I did not offer to take their coats. I walked back over and sat at the kitchen counter, asserting my space. They awkwardly sat at the small, round dining table by the window. The second wine glass was still hanging on the rack above the sink, catching the morning light. "I've been trying to reach you," Sarah said, gripping her purse in her lap. "I know. You didn't respond. I needed some time to think," I said smoothly. "I believe you said the exact same thing to me 2 nights ago." Helen's eyes darted between us, silently taking the temperature of the room. "I talked to the venue," Sarah said, her voice rising in pitch. "They told me the booking had been canceled." "Yes, you canceled our wedding venue," she gasped, acting as if I had committed a war crime. "I canceled a venue booked exclusively in my name on a contract I was solely financially party to, within the 60-day cancellation window specified in Section 4B of that contract, to prevent the loss of $18,000, I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Without talking to me? You looked me in the eye at dinner and told me it wasn't going to work," I replied. "I simply took you at your word, respected your need for a different life, and handled the resulting financial commitments accordingly. I didn't mean." She stopped, choking on her words. Helen reached out and put a comforting hand on Sarah's arm briefly, then quickly removed it when she saw my face. "I was in a bad place that night," Sarah stammered, tears welling up. "I was scared of the commitment. I was overwhelmed. I didn't mean I wanted to cancel everything. I just wanted to pause." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the steakhouse. I thought about the corporate hotel 2 blocks away. I thought about Marcus, I thought about her utilizing our relationship as a safety net while she test drove a coworker. When you left the restaurant, I said, speaking very slowly and carefully, where did you go? The silence in the kitchen lasted for approximately 6 agonizing seconds. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator. To a friend's, she finally squeaked. Which friend? Another suffocating silence. Helen looked down at the table, clearly uncomfortable with the interrogation. David, that's not Sarah started to deflect. I'm going to ask you one more time, I interrupted, my voice dropping an octave, commanding the room. And I would like you to think incredibly carefully about your answer, because I already know exactly where you were. And I am asking you to decide, right now, in this kitchen, in front of your mother, whether this conversation is going to be honest or whether it's going to be another managed PR version. I kept my eyes locked on hers. Where did you go? The thing that happened to Sarah's face in the following moment is not something I can fully describe with words. It was the specific, catastrophic collapse of a structural lie that had been maintained under significant psychological effort for a significant period of time. The management dropped. The mask shattered. What was underneath was just a terrified person who had been running 2 lives in parallel and had finally arrived at the violent intersection where they crashed. She told me. Not everything, of course. Not in that kitchen with her mother present. But she told me enough. She confessed to Marcus. 3 months. It had started as innocent work drinks and escalated. The dinner with me had been, she admitted through sobs, her cowardly attempt to create space to figure out what she wanted. Translated from its sanitized language, it was her attempt to suspend our engagement, keep me on the hook as Plan B, while she spent a few uninterrupted days determining whether the sex and excitement she had with Marcus was real enough to permanently leave me for. I sat there, absorbing the confirmation of 48 hours of calculation. Helen, to her immense credit, said absolutely nothing. She sat frozen in her chair. She was there as emotional support, not as an advocate, and she was reading the room with the devastating accuracy of a mother who suddenly understood that the tragic story she had been told by her daughter on the drive over was a complete and utter fabrication. Her daughter wasn't the victim of a cold, unfeeling fiancé who prematurely canceled a wedding. Her daughter was a cheater who got caught. I want to fix this, Sarah pleaded, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. I know how this looks. I know I handled it terribly, horribly wrong. But I love you. I want to fix it. I thought about the word fix. I thought about what fixing it would actually entail. A spring wedding with no venue. Rebooking a printer. Sending invitations to people like Jessica, who already knew she was kissing another man at a steakhouse. 14 months of planning for a marriage, she had been conducting a 3-month parallel evaluation of. I believe that you believe that right now, Sarah, I said softly. But I think what you actually want to fix is the intense discomfort of the consequences. You don't want to be the villain in your own story, but I am not able to help you with that anymore. She broke down entirely. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. Helen shifted her chair, moving closer to her daughter, wrapping an arm around her shaking shoulders. The kitchen held all of it, the suffocating grief, the betrayal, the finality. The second wine glass on the rack gleamed. The light coming through the window hit the angle that meant it was almost noon. The coffee cup in front of me had gone ice cold. I told her exactly what I needed her to know. I told her that we were done. Permanently. I told her that I wished her well, that I didn't intend to make the end of this uglier or more vindictive than it needed to be. And I told her that she would be hearing from my attorney, Mr. Vance, regarding the division of the remaining shared financial matters and the return of the engagement ring. I said all of this with a care, a precision, and a quietness that I think genuinely terrified her. Because what she had expected, what her mother's presence had been recruited to help manage, was rage. She expected me to scream, to throw things, to demand answers, to negotiate her return. She had prepared for a raging fire, and instead, I offered her a freezing, locked door. They eventually left. Helen practically had to carry her out. I stood in my quiet kitchen for a long while, after the door clicked shut. Then, I reached up, took the second wine glass off the rack, washed it in the sink, dried it with a towel, and put it away in the high cabinet with the others. The scene was clear. The event was over. Update 2. It has been a few weeks since that morning. And because the universe has an unparalleled sense of poetic justice, the situation with Marcus did not become the fairy tale romance Sarah had blown up her life for. These parallel situations, born in deception, rarely survive the harsh daylight of reality. What they are in the dark, sustained entirely by the thrilling, illicit energy of being a secret, tends to reveal itself as structurally and morally insufficient once it is required to exist without that energy. But the reality of Marcus was so much worse than just a fizzled romance. I know this because of the mutual acquaintance, Jessica, who has kept me loosely informed in the way people do when they feel they owe you the end of a story they helped start. Remember how I canceled the Botanical Garden venue at 11:47 p.m., 43 days out? That venue is notoriously difficult to book. They have a wait list that is literally years long. When a prime spring Saturday opens up, the venue immediately calls the next couple on the wait list. It turns out, Marcus was never going to leave his life for Sarah. Marcus already had a life. Marcus was engaged to a woman named Chloe. Marcus and Chloe had been desperately trying to get the Botanical Garden for their own wedding, but couldn't get a date. Marcus, being the sociopath that he is, was using his work trip excuses to string Sarah along for a thrilling fling before he settled down into his marriage. He knew about my venue and my date because Sarah talked about it incessantly at the office. When I canceled the venue that night, the slot immediately opened up. The venue coordinator called the next name on the wait list, Chloe. Chloe was thrilled. She booked it instantly. A week after our kitchen confrontation, Sarah went into the office, desperate to cling to Marcus now that she had lost me. Instead, she walked into a surprise office celebration. The team was throwing Marcus a congratulations party because his fiancée, Chloe, had just secured their dream wedding venue for May 14th. Our date, our venue. Sarah realized, in a crowded break room surrounded by clapping coworkers, that Marcus had never loved her. He had used her, and he was now marrying another woman on the exact day, in the exact garden, that she was supposed to marry me. The sheer, crushing weight of the karma apparently caused her to have a massive panic attack right there by the copy machine. She had to take a leave of absence from the agency. She reached out to me one final time, 3 weeks later. It was a massive, rambling, desperate email sent at 3 a.m. It was the kind of message people write when they have been sitting in the ruins of their own life and can no longer contain the agony. She apologized. She begged. She said she was a fool, that Marcus had manipulated her, that she had thrown away the only good man she ever knew. I read it once. I did not respond. Not out of cruelty, but out of the profound understanding that there was absolutely nothing in that email that required my participation. Her misery was her own creation. I am still living in the same apartment. The venue refunded the 75% of the deposit exactly as the contract stipulated, saving me over $13,000. The financial matters were resolved swiftly through Mr. Vance without significant conflict. Sarah was not in a position, legally, financially, or morally, to contest a single dime, and she knew it. She returned the ring via courier. I sold it and put the money into an index fund. The kitchen counter is where I do my thinking now. Early mornings, late nights. There is a particular quality of quiet that comes with living completely alone in a space that used to hold so much noise and expectation. I have gotten used to it. I wouldn't say it feels comfortable exactly, but it feels accurate. It feels honest. And after months of living inside a lie, honesty is the only thing I care about. Edith? People in the comments are asking intensely about the mother, Helen. Why did she come? Whose idea was it? Did she know about Marcus? My definitive read on the situation is that Sarah went to her family in an absolute panic after I canceled everything, and she told them a highly edited, incomplete version of events. She likely played the victim, claiming she just had cold feet, and that I had reacted with disproportionate, unhinged vindictiveness by canceling the wedding behind her back. People do this when they desperately need support but aren't ready to be honest about the horrific things they need support for. Helen came because she is a good mother who was worried about her crying daughter and hoped to facilitate a peaceful resolution between us. I do not hold a single thing against Helen. She figured out the shape of the real situation fairly quickly in that kitchen, and she adjusted her allegiance accordingly. She sent me a brief text message 2 weeks later, just 3 sentences saying she was deeply sorry for how things had gone, that I didn't deserve it, and that she wished me the best. I responded with equal brevity and equal sincerity. Some people, when the smoke clears and the situation clarifies, show you exactly who they actually are. Helen showed me she was a woman of integrity. Sarah showed me the opposite, Eddie Doy. The other question I keep getting repeatedly is whether I would have handled the situation differently if I hadn't checked the app and known about the hotel that night. The honest answer? The cancellations and the attorney? Yes, absolutely. I would have done those things regardless. She looked me in the eye and told me clearly it wasn't going to work. I had massive, catastrophic financial exposure that I needed to ruthlessly protect. I don't play games with contracts. The conversation in the kitchen, however, might have been different. I might have asked more probing questions. I might have been slightly more confused, but I think the essential, final shape of it would have been exactly the same, because the thing that ended us wasn't what I found out on the GPS app. It wasn't Jessica's text message. It wasn't even Marcus. It was what she said at the restaurant, the cold, practiced way she said it, and the fact that she walked out the door without looking back. That was the ending. Everything else, the hotel, the affair, the lawyer, the twist with the venue, was just documentation of a death that had already occurred. Tub comments. User 1. This is the most terrifyingly calm, John Wick-level emotional execution I've ever read on this site. The way you didn't yell, didn't scream, but just systematically dismantled her entire life infrastructure while she was sipping champagne with her affair partner. Absolute cinema. And the fact that Marcus ended up taking your canceled venue for his actual fiancée? You couldn't write a better karmic nuke if you tried. You saved yourself from a lifetime of misery, man. Well done. User 2. I have so much respect for how you handled the mother. A lot of guys would have dragged the family into it or yelled at the mom for raising a cheater. Recognizing that Helen was just a pawn who was lied to and letting Sarah's own lie collapse in front of her mother in real time was a masterclass in maturity. Helen realizing her daughter was the villain must have been heartbreaking, but you handled it with pure class. The "I am preserving a crime scene" line gave me chills. User 3. As a divorce attorney, I am standing up and slow, clapping at my desk. The amount of people who wait to see if things work out and end up losing tens of thousands of dollars in non-refundable deposits is staggering. You reading the contract, realizing you were on day 43 of a 60-day window, and firing off certified mail at midnight is the most hyper-competent thing I've seen. She wanted a different life, and you gave it to her with a bow on top. Enjoy the peace and quiet, King. You earned it.